This is Tatiana, and you're listening to UC3P.
Welcome to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. This is UC3P, our eponymously named podcast on policy, politics, and current affairs. My name is David Raban, and I'm the production manager for what we like to call the main page. Today, we're back with a brand new miniseries, Policy Jam. In this miniseries, we want to go broad on a policy topic. In doing so, you'll first hear an interview with an expert. Then you'll hear the podcasters make a song about it, or what we like to call a policy jam. The topic today, immigration. You'll hear from Sarah Pierce, an analyst with the Migration Policy Institute. A few notes before we get into it. First, this episode contains explicit language. If you don't want to hear explicit language, please tune out now and listen to another one of our episodes. Second, I want to remind you that UC3P is a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse any political opinions. Thus, any of the opinions you hear in the interview or in the song are only those of the speakers, not UC3P. And finally, make sure you tune in next week. It's our season finale, and we have a very special episode for you. Now, let's get straight into the interview. Without further ado, here's Policy Jam.
Welcome to UC3P, the main page. My name is Olu Ogidan.
And my name is Carmelo de Grazia.
And today we're talking to Sarah Pierce from the Migration Policy Institute about immigration on the southern border.
Ms. Pierce, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, to kind of get the conversation started, we want to talk a little bit about immigration law and policy. What is law versus policy, and how does that affect the people who are in the process?
Sure. So immigration policy would be the mess of different laws and decisions that the government makes that affects how immigration works on the ground. For who immigration law affects, it affects everyone, right? It determines how many immigrants can come into the United States, when and how they can come into the United States, and who exactly can come in. It affects how long foreign nationals can stay inside the United States and what they can do while they're here, and when they have to leave the United States as well. And then for those of us who are U.S. nationals, it affects the people that make up our communities. It affects whether or not we can reunite with family members. It affects who we employ and how our economy operates. It touches on a lot of different facets of just the way our society functions.
So could you just talk a little bit more about the administrative part of immigration policy?
Sure. So the administration, the executive has a lot of authority to decide how immigration operates. And actually, this administration is a really helpful illustration of that, because they have been able to enact so much of their immigration agenda via executive powers, whether that be increasing immigration enforcement, limiting legal immigration into the United States, ending certain immigration programs such as DACA or TPS. The way U.S. immigration law and policy is structured, the administration actually has a significant amount of power.
Now that you've explained that, we really want to talk about immigration to the southern border. We hear a lot about refugees and asylum seekers and DACA and that sort of thing. Could you take a moment to walk us through these things, these categories or policies, and how should they affect our understanding of our southern border?
So I think it's helpful to go through the history of unauthorized migration at the southern border. First off, you hear a lot of people talking about that number of apprehensions at the southern border. That's the number that, for instance, this administration especially is very attuned to. And the reason we talk about apprehensions is because we don't know how many people come into the country unauthorized across the border. We just don't have the technology or the wherewithal to know that. So instead, we look at the number of people who were apprehended trying to cross the southern border. And that's our measure for how many people are crossing the southern border. And when you look at the history, we have a long history of typically single adult males from Mexico trying to cross into the southern border. In the year 2000, it was 1.6 million were apprehended at the southern border. And while this flow was trying to come in, most of them were trying to come into the United States to work. They were trying to evade detection at the southern border. And yeah, so that was a different type of flow. When that was happening, Border Patrol typically was just able to kind of turn them back around and push them back. It was called a voluntary return. And that was just a different era. That era of migration at the southern border really drastically declined with the Great Recession. It came way back down. And then after 2008, as the economy started to recover, that population didn't tick back up. There were a lot of changes in Mexico and changes with the job market in the United States where that was just no longer a viable option for economic migrants from Mexico. Instead, the population we did see tick back up was largely this humanitarian flow from Central America. A lot of families, a lot of single children coming from Central America. And that's what we've been dealing with since especially like 2012 and 2014 is this really humanitarian flow. Unfortunately, there has not been a change at the southern border in the resources required to address this new flow. Instead, we still have this kind of enforcement first mentality and laws and policies and resources really in place at the southern border. So there's this kind of mixed bag of the new reality of this new humanitarian flow, but these outdated resources and a very outdated mindset. The president kind of pushes that single Mexican economic migrant mentality when he talks about the southern border, when obviously the reality today is very different. So those are the asylees that we talk about on the southern border. A lot of people frame them as refugees, which is another term for a protected migrant. In the United States, under U.S. immigration law, refugee actually means something different. They're typically people who apply abroad, typically with the United Nations for protection, and then they come into the United States pre-approved to be a refugee in the United States, where an asylee is someone who comes to the United States physically in the United States, asks for protection. And then DACA is a program, an administrative program that was started during the Obama administration that allowed young people under the age of, I believe, 31 to apply for certain protections. When he started the program in 2012, they had to be living in the United States at that time and had to have been here since 2007. So these are people who have been in the United States for a significant amount of time, who came before the age of, I believe, 16. And it's just an administrative benefit. It doesn't come with a lot of benefits. It's essentially just a promise from the federal government to not deport you for 3 years. And it comes with work authorization. And we've had a lot of discussions about DACA under this administration because President Trump has tried to end it. But there's currently 3 court cases that are kind of propping up the program. And we're waiting to hear the final word from the Supreme Court about that any day now.
I want to follow up a little bit on something that you said regarding economic migrant and humanitarian migrant. And I also want to follow up a little bit on DACA, but what is the difference between the two? How should we think about what is an economic migrant? What does that mean?
So yeah, economic migrants, the term is meant to represent individuals who are coming to the United States primarily for work. There is a lot of concern that these migrants are replacing U.S. workers. Typically, that isn't the case. They typically tend to complement U.S. workers, meaning that they take jobs that U.S. workers won't take. And that's why they come to the United States in such large numbers, because there is a demand for their labor. Then, yeah, humanitarian migrants is more of how the asylees that we think of, people who are fleeing persecution or dangerous conditions at home.
How did family separation even start? Because I've heard some a little bit about, Obama used to do it and it's always been around. How did we get there?
Sure. So under President Obama and prior administration, there were these 4 cause separations. So separations for a particular reason or because there was a particular concern with the adult accompanying the child. but there never were mass separations of parents and young children like there were under the Trump administration. That never occurred before. What the Trump administration did that the policy change they made that caused these separations was something called zero tolerance. So Jeff Sessions was the attorney general at the time. He announced that they would be trying to prosecute 100% of migrants who cross the southern border illegally, even parents. And what that meant, practically speaking, on the ground was after apprehension by DHS, the parents were then taken into the custody of federal marshals so they could be prosecuted for illegal entry. The children could not follow the parents into federal custody, so instead the children were reclassified as unaccompanied child migrants. And we have a whole special process for unaccompanied child migrants that entails them being resettled in health and human services facilities across the country and eventually ideally released to sponsors across the United States. But it not only physically puts them in a very different place than their parents, it also changed their immigration cases. So they were suddenly in long-term immigration proceedings. Well, the parents were still in something called expedited removal, which really pushes them to be deported as quickly as possible. And that is the policy device that really caused this mass separation of parents and children.
That sounds like a good time to take a break. We'll be right back.
Hey, thanks for listening to UC3P, the main page. We know you're enjoying this episode, and we really want to get you back to it as soon as possible. The problem is, if you're listening to this, there's a really good chance you haven't subscribed to the show yet. Don't worry, that's super easy to fix. Just go on your phone, pick your favorite podcast app, and type in UC3P or the main page. It's easy to subscribe, and we know you don't want to miss any more episodes. Again, type in UC3P or the main page and subscribe. Now go tell a friend.
So, Ms. Pierce, we've been talking a lot about the current policies that are enacted on the ground, but we really brought you here to talk more about hypothetical policies that we could pursue that would perhaps improve the immigration system. One of these policies that a lot of people have heard about is Abolish ICE. What is ICE exactly, and what does it mean, or what would it mean to abolish it?
So ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, is our interior enforcement arm of the immigration system. Abolish ICE, I know it started before the summer of 2018, but it was the summer of 2018 when it became really popular. And I think there was a confluence of factors that led to that. Obviously, family separation was happening during the summer of 2018. Everyone was really horrified by that. But also, the president had run on immigration and won on immigration and was very clearly implementing his series of immigration policy changes, and the left just didn't really have a response. There's still kind of lacking this really policy vision on the left for what immigration should look like, and they were lacking kind of a catchy phrase too, right? The president was elected with everyone screaming, build the wall, build the wall, build the wall. And so this phrase kind of emerged, and I think it really filled a need a lot of people had to kind of rally against the president's vision for what the immigration system should look like. Abolishing ICE, it would create a very imbalanced system. I mean, we have immigration laws. We've created those laws because we think they benefit the country and we want them enforced. And ICE is the vehicle for doing that enforcement. So I think there are some people that support Abolish ICE and really do want to entirely eliminate immigration enforcement. But I also think that there are a lot of people that support Abolish ICE that really just find problems with the agency itself and how it operates more as a law enforcement agency than anything else. And they want to see that agency reworked. And I would argue that the changes they're envisioning could be implemented a lot more affordably by a change in leadership and a change in policy rather than deconstructing the entire agency itself.
Not to necessarily wrap it up, but just to kind of get an understanding, if you were designing an immigration policy, what kind of best policy would you put forward?
Yeah, so the top two things on my immigration policy wish list, the first would be